Can you see that, Tim? Yeah, but it's not changing slides. Okay. Good. All right. Who's sweating? Yeah. Listen, no, we didn't. But yeah. I first want to say thank you to City and Avi and Holly back there, and thank you to Coniferous Cafe. They do lots of good things in this town. This space has not been open long, and they're looking to expand, and this was not intended, but I think this works for convincing folks that they should expand into the space next door. So make sure you give them, if you can, $5 or $10 donation. So thank you, City. This talk is adapted from a 7-story series at Jack Psycho Geo. If you don't know the site, there are between 350 and 400 different stories about locations around Jacksonville. Personally, if I had not created it myself, I would think this is a really cool way to explore the city. So if you haven't looked at it, hopefully you will. I also want to say, that some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about and some of the visuals you're going to see, they're going to piss you off. Some of them are going to break your heart. And some of the language bothers me, But it is the history of this place and this town and the South and the United States. And just because it's history doesn't mean it's gone, right? There's a famous William Faulkner quote about that, but also James Baldwin says, that history isn't the past, it's the present. He says, you and I are history we enact. I'd like to say, as a word of preface also, that I grew up here. I'm from this town. I'm from the South. And there are a lot of people who will tell you that the South only he was the America. And though a lot of people will tell you that, the Confederate flag means a certain thing, it means, pride at having grown up in a certain geographic region, etc. Stevens said in something called his cornerstone speech in Savannah, Georgia, in 1861, Our new government, meaning the Confederacy, is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. That's what the Vice President of the Confederacy said in his cornerstone speech. The guy on the other side is Nathan Bedford Forrest. I graduated from Nathan Bedford Forrest High School. Where are the Jacksonville Progressive Coalition people in the room? All right. Who had, yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Who fought for the renaming of this high school. There used to be high schools all over the South named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. Jacksonville was one of the last places to change the name of its high school. Forrest helped form the KKK in Tennessee in the wake of the Civil War in 1866. The Civil Rights Act of 1871, also called the Ku Klux Klan Act and the Klan Act, followed a congressional investigation that filled 12 volumes of documented Klan crimes and ended the KKK. It was done until its second iteration in 1915. A prominent Jacksonville attorney and Klansman in 1950 who called himself Nathan II. We'll hear more about him in a little bit. The upper picture on the left, if you guys can see it, is a slide from The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith film in 1915, 3-hour film that glamorized and romanticized the former iteration of the KKK and led to its reiteration, which happened the same year. The KKK and the United Daughters of the Confederacy financed the Confederate Memorial, which you can see on the right, on the side of Stone Mountain, Georgia. How many people have been in Stone Mountain? I'm just curious. I have. All right. Gutzon Borglum, who later carved Mount Rushmore into the sacred Black Hills, the Lakota Indians, also was carving Stone Mountain until funds ran dry. And that led to the second iteration of the KKK in 1915. And that was the period of time when actually the Klan had its largest membership. In 1920, to bring this to Jacksonville, when American women received the right to vote, black activists like Jacksonville's Eartha White, and if I may say so, you can buy from Coniferous Cafe my book on Eartha White, which is standing behind Alan Marcella. To my mind, I mean, seriously, the greatest person ever to come from Jacksonville and call this town home. She lived for 97 years, died in 1974, and did every good thing you could ever think of doing. 1920, Eartha White headed voter drives to register black women, who in turn would influence more black men to vote. There were still poll taxes at the time, which were a detriment to black voting, but the 19th Amendment meant that black women, for the first time, as white women, could vote. The Klan organized Jacksonville Election Day parades to intimidate black people from voting. This wasn't just in Jacksonville. Across the post-Confederate South, the Klan lit up night rallies with their towering, burning crosses and promised vengeance upon black voters who dared cross the natural supremacy, in their words, of the white race. On October 30th, the NAACP telegrammed the sheriff of Duval County, the mayor of Jacksonville, and the governor of Florida. Advertised purpose of parade is to prevent trouble on election day. And, yeah, I'm glad there's laughter. You know, it's kind of surprising in some ways, but not really. that the KKK was often, they couched their rhetoric very passive-aggressively. So, they were all about law and order, right? And, right. Advertised purpose of parade is to prevent trouble on Election Day. Real motivation, the NAACP said in their telegram, terrorization and intimidation of colored voters, instead of prevention, will likely lead to trouble and perhaps bloodshed, responsibility for which would rest upon city and county. The black citizens of Jacksonville showed up to vote in record numbers, and though they shouted at Klansmen in their hoods and their masks at the time, they resisted KKK incitements to violence. They protested the Klan's protests peacefully, and they voted. Republican votes skyrocketed since black communities still voted the party of Lincoln, right? This was before the 1950s when Lyndon Johnson signed so much civil rights legislation and black voters turned to the Democratic Party. Despite heavy black turnout, official vote tallies eliminated all but a very few new black votes. Eartha White led other voters in their own, other activists in their own vote counts. Many qualified electors, in her words, and she recorded the times and their names and addresses, stood in line from 8 a.m. to 5:40 p.m., She documented white poll workers who took early breaks that stretched into hours-long lunches. Eartha White, the NAACP, and affiliated activists compared notes and estimated that between 3,000 and 4,000 black voters have been terrorized from or outright denied the chance to vote in Duval County's first post-19th Amendment election. Election Day 1920 was far bloodier elsewhere in Florida. In Ocoee, outside of Orlando, a white mob murdered around 50 black residents and burnt the town's black houses, church, and schoolroom to the ground. University of Florida historian Paul Ortiz has called the Ocoee massacre, quote, the single bloodiest day in modern U.S. political history. The bullet-filled body of a black contractor named Julius Perry, which is who you see on the left, was hung from a light pole in Orlando, bearing a sign that read, "This is what we do to niggers that vote." Reverend A.C. Schuler, pastor of Jacksonville's former Calvary Baptist Church, predicted the Klan would pick the next American president. The Klan's membership at the time had risen to around 5 million. He promised other towns Klan parades of grand proportions and majesty like those in which he'd recently participated in Jacksonville. In the Klan Unmasked, which is the central image, Stetson Kennedy, who grew up in Jacksonville, recalls seeing his first Klan parade as a child. He writes, "We were standing on the curb of Jacksonville, Florida's Main Street when the Klansmen came into view. At the head of the procession were 2 Klansmen mounted on horseback. The horses were also clad in flowing white with masks over their faces, very much like those I had seen in my history books on the steeds of tilting medieval knights. One of the mounted knights of the KKK bore a flaming fiery cross, while the other blew long, mournful blasts on a bugle. At each intersection, they would jerk on the reins, and the horses would rear up and paw the air, neighing shrilly It was an awe-inspiring spectacle, and I was duly impressed. Stetson's mother shut him up, however, when he recognized the shoes of one Klansman beneath his robe and shouted, "There he is! That's Uncle Brady!" Not much later, he accidentally discovered that his family's black maid, Flo, who had nurtured him and loved him as long as he could recall, had been visited by the Klan, removed from her house, tied to a pine tree, and flogged. Then, after most of the other Klansmen had left her tied to the tree, raped. All for allegedly sassing a white streetcar conductor whom she questioned for returning the wrong change. Kennedy writes, "More and more of the Klan's handiwork came to my attention, and the hatred I had formed for it at Flo's bedside was confirmed and reconfirmed." Willie Chappelle, the last image up there, we'll come back to him a little bit later too, remembered how his father told him and his brothers to duck their heads and not to peek when he drove through a certain wooded area off Edgewood Avenue on the northwest side of Jacksonville. The power of a child's curiosity being insurmountable, Willie looked. He would never forget what he saw. 40 years later, people asked him why he didn't pursue justice after the 4 white men who murdered his wife got off so easily. And again, we'll come back to that. "Listen," he said. "You ain't never seen a man hung up by his neck in your lifetime. You ain't never seen a woman's belly split open. But I have." Off Edgewood Avenue, near where James Bowman, we'll talk about him in a bit too, would assume ministerial duties at his first church more than 30 years later, Willie Chappelle saw burnt Klan crosses in the woods. He saw a black body lynched hanging from a tree. He said he would, quote, "never forget that feeling." So moving through the 1940s and the 1950s, Jacksonville would name several prominent bridges and streets and schools after, well, despicable people. It's odd that some people are so offended by the idea of changing, the names of things from such despicable people. Including, of course, the Fuller Warren Bridge. For whom? Governor Fuller Warren, that's him on the left. Former Jacksonville City Councilman and Klansman. In 1949, Warren called the Klan covered cowards and sheeted jerks. But only after Jacksonville Klansman and Baptist preacher A.C. Schuler outed Warren in his sermon as a Klansman. The Warren administration refused to investigate a rash of Klan violence in Miami, including 3 bombings of newly integrated Carver Village public housing and bombings of a synagogue, a Catholic church, and several homes in predominantly Jewish neighborhoods. When the Klan's rage led to the deaths of, on the right, NAACP leader Harry T. Moore and his wife, and we'll talk about them more in a bit too, Warren appointed Special Investigator Jefferson Elliott to the case. Elliott was another former Klansman. 1950, Stetson Kennedy writes in The Klan Unmasked of a new, and the Klan, if you don't know this, regularly changed words that started with a C to starting with a KL, which would be laughable if they, hadn't murdered people and so on. So, 1950, Stetson Kennedy writes in The Klan Unmasked of a new Klanvention held in the woods outside Jacksonville. It was claimed extravagantly as usual that 150 Clippiers, delegates, representing 650,000 Klansmen and 302 Claverns in 12 states were present. Jacksonville was named as the new Imperial City in place of Atlanta, the Klan's traditional capital of its so-called invisible empire. And a mysterious wizard who signed his edicts merely Nathan II, after Nathan Bedford Forrest, was elected. The Associated Press reported the new affiliation as the Southern and Northern Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, though it was based entirely in the South, with its emperor known only as Nathan II. Several writers, including Kennedy, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter named Spencer McCullough outed Nathan II as the guy on the left, Jacksonville attorney and Duval County Democratic Party Chairman Edgar Waybright Sr. When, in April 1952, Bill Hendricks, who's in the picture on the right, the guy in the regalia that looks kind of like Mike Pence, dropped out of the race for governor of Florida, the United Press reported that he, quote, resumed his old job as Grand Dragon of the Florida Klan. The UP report continued, the only reason he entered the governor's race in the first place, Hendricks said, was because he was persuaded to do so by Edgar Waybright Sr., chairman of the Duval County Democratic Executive Committee. The Klan had always been self-righteous, but now, as it splintered into numerous smaller Klan groups, became increasingly passive-aggressive. In fact, the Klan had decades-long patterns of passive-aggressiveness. The new Southern Knights declared their purpose, their reason for being, as fighting hate groups, among whom they counted the NAACP, as though no one had ever called the Klan such a name. In February 1951, as though to appropriate likely Florida legislation, Bill Hendricks traveled from Tallahassee to ask the Jacksonville City Council to impose an anti-mask ordinance on the city. Do you guys remember the weird clown sightings in South Carolina in the fall, right? And I remember reading about that, and everybody saying it's against the law for adults to wear masks. Well, it comes from the Klan. So Bill Hendricks travels to Jacksonville to ask the city council to impose an anti-mask ordinance on the city. The Southern KKKK, 4Ks, including Knights, requested anti-masking not, so it's said, because such state legislation was sure to pass and they knew it, but in order to, quote, keep our enemies from committing acts of violence and laying it on the Klan. In early August, the Associated Press reported that in the final weeks before the laws took effect, Floridians witnessed, quote, a rash of demonstrations in which crosses or Ks were burnt along the highways. In 1951, on Christmas Day, the Klan bombed the home of NAACP leader Harry T. Moore and his wife Harriet, and that's them on the left, just outside Orlando, after Moore opposed Jacksonville State Senator John Matthews' white primary bill, which, if passed, would have prevented black citizens from voting in primary elections. The Moores died together on their 25th wedding anniversary. Jacksonville named its Matthews Bridge after the senator. Increasingly, Klan activity was blamed on, quote, enemies of the Klan, including communists and the NAACP. The Klan would threaten, follow through, then blame its targets. The Klan even claimed to suspect the NAACP for bombing the home of Harry T. Moore for purposes of propaganda and fundraising. In a May 1958 nationally syndicated op-ed, conservative columnist David Lawrence asked, "Is communist money back of the bombing of a Negro school and a Jewish church building in Jacksonville, Florida?" Lawrence suggested communists were impersonating white supremacist groups to threaten and then carry out attacks on Klan targets. It's 1957. James Bowman had become the first full-time pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church at 2730 Edgewood Avenue in rural northwest Duval County. It was his first year out of seminary and the year after the church was founded. Bowman was in for far more culture shock from the white South than he'd experienced eating barbecue at Black Seminarian and his good friend Sam Horrid's home in a black neighborhood of St. Louis. Parts of the rural north side of Jacksonville, like Ocean Way, Pecan Park, Callahan, and the area of Edgewood Avenue around Bowman's new church had long been notorious for Klan activity. The Klan's annual membership drives outside Imeson Airport near Ocean Way featured fiery crosses and attracted hundreds of people. As he writes in a private family history, "I was invited to speak at various community events, and this was creating some uneasiness. Jacksonville whites didn't care for this white preacher heading up a black church. Several black churches received bomb threats and night visits from the Klan." Anybody know Kate Halleck in here? She is the editor of the Resident Community News, which comes out in San Marco and Riverside, some other places. "My mother was scared out of her mind," his daughter, Kate Halleck, says. Due to neighborhood segregation, the Bowmans lived several miles from the Garden Vale, Magnolia Gardens neighborhoods around their church, but that distance made Jean Bowman even more anxious. "We had one car, and my father was often at the church until late," Kate says. "So my mother was home alone all day and at night with 3 little girls, no access to a car, and for a long time, no phone. For some reason, it took the city 4 months to get my parents a phone hooked up." By early 1959, a year and a half into his pastorate, James and Jean Bowman knew it was time to leave town. The phone that had taken so long to install was now the vehicle for threats against the Bowman family. After an increase in bomb threats against black Jacksonville churches in the midst of the 17-year period of more than 50 Klan and white supremacist bombings in Birmingham, Alabama alone, Kate's parents concluded that their presence at St. Paul might not only endanger their family, but the congregation as well. In his family history, Bowman writes, "Some of the black churches, some of the black pastors in that community were warning some of our members that we might be next because of that white minister." After personal threats against his family, Bowman suggested to the Lutheran district president that for everyone's sake it was time for me to move so that a black pastor could be called. The Lutheran Church moved the Bowmans immediately to North Miami Beach. I preached my last sermon at St. Paul Lutheran Church on February 15th, 1959, he writes, and we bid each other a tearful farewell. So the bottom pictures on the left, that's what the church looked like when he was there. That building is still there, and the other structure is the church today. And into the 1960s. Numerous Klan rallies occurred at this time in Jacksonville, including a large annual membership drive outside Jacksonville's Imison Airport near rural Oceanway. These rallies occurred in numerous rural Northside areas, but the largest were across North Main Street from where the Anheuser-Busch Brewery is now. The airport was about 2 blocks south. Both of those photos are from the Florida Times-Union. The Times-Union and wire services reported on these rallies / membership drives from the mid-1950s to the mid-1960s. In September 1963, United Press International reported on the annual airport rally saying, about 500 persons, some 50 of them in the flowing, hooded white robes of the South's oldest secret society, burned a 15-foot cross and sang Dixie and the Old Rugged Cross. 1960. Whites with baseball bats and axe handles, some dressed in Confederate uniforms, attacked black civil rights protesters at Hemming Park and in nearby streets downtown in an assault that would come to be known as Axe Handle Saturday. The sheriff's office had ignored reports from an undercover FBI agent about coming Klan violence. In its 1965 report on the Ku Klux Klan, covers on the right, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith stated tactics for combating the sit-ins were discussed at a meeting on August 23rd of the Jacksonville Clavern of the Florida Knights of the KKK. Klan Imperial Wizard Robert Lee Wild Bill Davidson declared publicly in Atlanta not 3 months after Axe Handle Saturday, if it takes buckshot to keep the black race down, Klansmen will use it. And on the night of March 26, 1961, Klan groups coordinated the burning of more than 1,000 crosses throughout the South. In 1964, the KKK bombed 6-year-old Donald Godfrey's house. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And rallied against civil rights activists in St. Augustine. 1964, Jacksonville Mayor Hayden Burns, after whom, of course, the Hayden Burns Library is named, who promised to crush attempts to desegregate downtown hotels, deputized 500 white firefighters as additional police officers to stamp out civil rights protests downtown, creating instant cops who truncheoned black student protesters, numbering perhaps as many as 2,000 in the city's central streets. Johnny May Chappelle was murdered on Jacksonville's North Side in 1964. Of the 4 white men who claimed to have gone driving around the North Side, quote, looking to kill a nigger, angry about civil rights protests downtown, Wayne Chessman, Elmer Cato, and James Davis were released with all charges dropped. J.W. Rich, who fired the shot that killed Johnny May, was paroled in 4 years. Homicide detectives Lee Cody, and Donald Coleman accused the sheriff's office of purposely losing evidence already in police custody, including the murder weapon. 1969, it's a Times-Union photo on the right. Race riots on Jacksonville's east side capped a decade of Jacksonville race war when a white man named William Simmons, age 23, shot an unarmed black man named John Riley, age 20, for standing too close to his pickup truck outside the Pickens Theater on Florida Avenue. The 6 men, clowns of the Ku Klux Klan, were charged not with a federal hate crime, since the bombing occurred 4 years prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1968 and 30 years before the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, not with attempted murder, but with conspiring to threaten and intimidate 6-year-old Donald Godfrey and his mother, Iona, and to violate their constitutional rights. The latter charge would depend on whether white jurors recognized the Godfreys as having any rights. 53 years later, Donald Godfrey tells me from his home in Monrovia, Liberia, that if the family had been on the side of the house where the bomb detonated deep in the night, they'd be dead. It blew the refrigerator through the roof, he says. Not too many people have survived a Klan bombing. It's an exclusive club. A decade before, the Supreme Court had ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that establishing separate schools for children of different races was unconstitutional. So, in 1963, Iona Godfrey decided Duval County, Florida, could abide by the ruling of the court and registered her 5.5-year-old son for first grade at Lackawanna Elementary School, PS number 10, built in the 19-teens on Lenox Avenue. He was the first black student at Lackawanna and one of 13 black first graders in formerly all-white schools in the county. That first morning, a group of white mothers berated him and his mother outside the school. "Where do you think you're taking that nigger?" one of them yelled at Donald's mother. Donald sat in the back of the class, studied hard, minded his own business his first few months. Then, Donald became friends with a little white girl in class. When the two of them walked home from school, a group of women on Phyllis Street shouted "nigger" and "nigger lover" at the 6-year-olds. One of those women was the mother of another first grade classmate. That other classmate's father, Kenneth Overstreet Sr., was in the Klan. Anonymous phone calls warned the Godfreys they needed to remove Donald from Lackawanna Elementary before something bad happened. In the dark before the morning, Sunday, February 16th, a bomb made of 20 sticks of stolen explosives tore through the side of the Godfrey home at 3259, I'm ashamed to say, Gilmore Street. Donald was asleep on the other side of the house, but the blast blew him out of bed and left a strange odor in his head. He was able years later to identify the smell, which never left him, as dynamite. When 5 of the Klansmen were arrested on Thursday night, March 12th, they were identified by name, position with the Klan, and clavern, or local unit. Burton H. Griffin was Exalted Cyclops of Jacksonville's Confederate General Robert E. Lee Clavering 13. Jackie D. Hardin was Exalted Cyclops of Robert E. Lee Clavern number 8. Willie Eugene Wilson was a former Florida Great Titan. Robert Pittman Gentry was Kligrap of Lee Clavern number 8. Newspapers failed to mention the position of Donald Eugene Spiegel with the Klan, as well as that of William Rosecrans, who'd been arrested in nearby St. Augustine on March 1st. Rosecrans testified in court that he placed the bomb, quote, to get the niggers out of Lackawanna. Klan attorney J.B. Stoner admonished the all-white jury in his closing arguments. What about these white people in the Ku Klux Klan? Don't they have as many civil rights as the NAACP? Let the whole country know that we white people have some rights. Another all-white jury acquitted 4 of the Klansmen on November 26th, the previous trial having ended in Hardin's acquittal, Rosecrans pleading guilty, and a mistrial for the others. And Stoner crowed, calling the FBI the Federal Bureau of Integration and declaring the verdict a victory for the white race. Donald has worked for the United States Foreign Service for 13 years. He lived 2 years in Norway, then 11 years in Africa. He spent 5 years in Ghana. He's lived in Monrovia for 2 years. Soon he'll be eligible for retirement. He has no desire to come back to the States. He has a house in Ghana to which he'll return when he retires. The Klan bombing of our house, he says, shaped my future perspective on the U.S. and its rhetoric of home of the free and the brave, and freedom and justice for all. These slogans did not ring true for me no matter how I sliced them. I want my grandchildren, and there's one, to have a legacy they can follow as free black people without being terrorized physically and mentally, without being exposed to the outright in-your-face racism we see in today's America as President Donald Trump takes office to make America great again. How long, he asks rhetorically, do we sing "We shall overcome" before we overcome? J.B. Stoner, the Klansman's attorney in the Godfrey case, became the attorney for a brief time for James Earl Ray, the murderer of Martin Luther King. In 1980, Stoner was convicted of bombing Birmingham's Bethel Baptist Church in 1958. The FBI had suspected Stoner of helping the Alabama city earn its nickname of Bombingham, more than 50 bombs over 17 years, but only scored 1 conviction against him. The Klan also bombed Bethel in 1956 and 1962. None of those are the East 16th Street Baptist Church bombing that killed 4 little black girls. Throughout the St. Augustine movement, a major battle of the civil rights movement in 1963 and 64, Stoner spoke to Klan rallies and incited violence. In 1963, in response to Klan death threats against civil rights activists in St. Augustine, black dentist Robert Haling, who is the tall guy on the left, made national headlines by saying, "I and the others have armed. We will shoot first and ask questions later. We are not going to die like Medgar Evers," who is on the right. On June 12, 1963, Evers took a bullet in the back of his head and died in his driveway in Jackson, Mississippi after returning from an NAACP meeting. It was another 31 years before Klansman Byron Della Beckwith was convicted for Evers' murder. In September, the Klan kidnapped Haling and 3 other NAACP activists, hauled them to a Klan meeting, complete with burning crosses and thugs and hoods and beat them with clubs and chains. J.B. Stoner successfully defended the Klan against Hailing and the other NAACP members. Hailing was convicted of assaulting the Klansmen. All charges against the Klan were dropped. In the summer of 1964, Martin Luther King, Andrew Young, Ralph Abernathy, and other prominent civil rights leaders held peaceful protest marches through St. Augustine. In early June, the St. Augustine house where King was staying was torched. The Klan rode through the historic black neighborhood of Lincolnville, firing their guns into houses, and Lincolnville residents shot back. When civil rights activists jumped into the whites-only swimming pool at Monson Motor Lodge, Jimmy Brock, the motel manager, poured corrosive acid into the water. With what he called royal treatment from St. Augustine's mayor and the St. Johns County Sheriff, J.B. Stoner, that endearing, charming guy up there, led a Klan march through Lincolnville, organized Klan counter-rallies denouncing Martin Luther King as America's King Coon in the most violent terms, and gave speeches like the one he described to an Atlanta attorney in the 1990s, where he said, "Sorry niggers disturbed my speech and taunted the whites. The cops had dogs," which Stoner said helped a sort of pandemonium, and assaulted and arrested protesters. He said, "And the niggers. The police were carrying them off that night. It looked like a battlefield." Stoner said St. Augustine's Klan numbers swelled greatly from the presence of several Jacksonville Klaverns and the St. Augustine-based Klan-affiliated Ancient City Hunting Club. Shortly before he died in a nursing home in 2005, Stoner told an Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter, "Society has changed. It was changed by defeat. Defeat of the white people against race mixing." All right. The Klan, and play a little bit with their ridiculous tendency to replace words that start with C with KLs. The Klan and Neo-Confederacy declined toward infighting and generally perceived backwardness in the 1970s and 80s. Former Klansmen and Klan affiliates increasingly walked the line Confederate apologists found necessary. They argued the South had always wanted the best for black people, that slaves were treated like family. The Klan, they claimed, had protected Southern culture from those who hated and sought to destroy it. The Confederacy, meanwhile, never was anything but pro-American. Irresponsible and denialist slogans in defense of the Confederate flag like "heritage, not hate," proliferated. Even in the 1990s, however, Duval County School Board Chair Linda Sparks appointed Susan Lamb, co-founder of the Jacksonville chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of White People, to a school desegregation task force formed 40 years after the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision. NAAWP newsletters sanctioned shooting hyphenated Americans, then billing victims' families for the bullets, promoted a eugenicist basis for, quote, Negro inferiority, debunked long ago with the rise of, Adolf Hitler, and advocated the notion that Jews, quote, divide and conquer through race war. Recently, Ku Klux Klan Trump victory parades devolved, quickly into what? Chaos. Reports from the Southern Poverty Law Center bore the headlines Ku Klux Kant and Ku Klux Clowns. The loyal white knights of the KKK failed to deliver on a grand Trump victory parade in North Carolina. Authorities stood on guard in separate North Carolina towns because the white knights could not accurately communicate the location of their clumming cavalcade. Finally, a few pickups flying Confederate flags zipped through itty-bitty downtown Roxborough and were gone. The grand spectacle had sputtered. The night before, 3 loyal white knight leaders, one from White Lives Matter in California, which is the guy on the right, the mugshot, one from Indiana, and one at home in North Carolina's East Yanceyville, beat and stabbed each other senseless in preparation for the next day's Trump celebration. All right. Still, one more Jack's Klan story I have to tell you. Let everything have come to this. The clapstone should make you laugh. If Martin Luther King was right that the arc of the moral universe is long but it bends toward justice, perhaps it also has a sense of humor. A wave of mostly black protesters, about 300 of them, marched against the Klan before the Duval County Courthouse on Bay Street, 1982, chanting, "Who's going to stop the Klan? We're going to stop the Klan." Clyde Wayne Royals, whose Klan title was Grand Titan of Georgia, later hid in the 3rd floor courthouse bathroom with 2 other Klansmen and a supporter. A black protester named Rose Marie C.A. had snatched the white hood off Royals' head and was parading around on the street with it for cameras. On February 15th, 1982, Sheriff Dale Carson, the same sheriff whose office ignored FBI information about planned Klan violence before Axe Handle Saturday in 1960, fired Robert McMullen, a sheriff's office records clerk, when Carson discovered McMullen was Kleagle for the Jacksonville Clavern. A little more than a week later, Imperial Wizard Bill Wilkinson of Louisiana marched with McMullen, Royals, and 3 other Kluxers in front of the courthouse. When the 3 Klansmen scampered inside, police sealed the courthouse entrance. When they thought it was safe, the Klansmen slipped past their police guard and ran outside, but quickly ducked back into the courthouse again. The Associated Press reported the 3 of the Klansmen, quote, along with a news reporter, fled down one hall, up another, up a back staircase, 2 flights, and hid in the bathroom, where, they told a reporter, they were surprised at the attitude of the crowd. He accused us of being racist, one said, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his shirt tail. Klan members compared themselves to the NAACP, apples and oranges, and Great Titan Royals opined, I don't know of anyone who was ever fired for being a member of the NAACP, and that's the same thing, just a difference of color. Then he disparaged Florida and Jacksonville specifically. If ever I cross the Florida-Georgia line again, it'll be for a damn good reason, which the whimpering white titan seemed to suggest this recent Klan sojourn was not. Then, as though Florida's northernmost major city and the Sunshine State's most culturally southern have become a lost cause, he lamented, it won't be for any damn rally in Jacksonville. obviously, I looked up Rosemary. I was hoping to talk to her. She was in her early 20s when she helped crash a Klan march, and her image appeared in newspapers across the nation. But Rosemary, or Ree, as many friends called her, died in 2005 of unspecified neurological causes at Shands Hospital, Jacksonville. She was 44. Everybody who knew her seemed to love her. And I love these images of her, and I feel like, like seeing that particular photograph, it should be an award-winning photograph, and I feel like almost like I know her, Her friends and family recall all the laughs we shared, cutting up, and being partners in crime. Our friend Lorenzo says Ree protected him as a child. If not for Ree, he says, I don't know what I would have turned out to be. She kept me straight. I could come to her about anything, and she always took care of things for me. Her friend Ira calls her the big sister I never had. And her friend Shaniqua says she always treated me with so much respect. She treated me like I was her family. And that Associated Press wire photo of 20 years before she died, I feel like you can see glimpses of the beautiful soul her closest friends and family recall. The get-togethers on 26th Street were never the same, her friend Yolanda says. I dare say, after Rosemary C.A., no Klan rally in Jacksonville was ever the same either. It's tempting to let this sordid history end on a joyous note of Schadenfreude, which is a great German word, for the glee you feel at someone else's displeasure. But the absence of masks and hoods in our field of vision is not the end of the story. In a 1971 conversation with anthropologist Margaret Mead, published as A Rap on Race, James Baldwin says, if history were past, history wouldn't matter. History is the present. You and I are history. We carry our history. We act our history. Today's masks are indistinguishable from the faces they cover. The figure of a racist villain hiding blindingly in his white hood makes for a perfect straw man. When he stands in our field of vision, we know with whom we're dealing. But before the Klan collapsed, it hasn't entirely, but it was splintered into lots and lots of ridiculous little groups. It had learned to deny its racism. Racism no longer defended racism. Racism denied and decried racism. Saying it despised racism, racism could better go about its business. So I think we have to watch carefully. The root of the word ignorance is ignore. I think we have to pay careful attention. If attention is indeed something to be paid, then consider to what we owe it. And if we pay not the attention we owe, I fear that we fall into debt. A debt that exacts itself over and over again and again without conscience, without mercy. But imagine if we could achieve something more than just countering the negative. Imagine turning the narrative positive. What would we have to do? Governor Ossian Hart, who was the son of Isaiah David Hart, who founded the city of Jacksonville, and who made his wealth by stealing slaves and selling them in Georgia. Governor Austin Hart, who in many ways despised his father and is a really complicated figure. He's the 10th governor of Florida. He's no progressive by today's standards. Believed that Florida could atone for its sins, for its portion of the Confederacy. In his most optimistic moments, while he coughed up blood dying from tuberculosis, he was only governor for 15 months before he died, he imagined the southernmost state owning up to itself, standing up straight and leading the rest of the Union into a progressive future. I'm not about to suggest that that looks like it's about to happen, but what if we could imagine not just countering the negative, but, what if we could own some kind of positive future, some kind of total returning of the narrative? I realize it sounds naive to be anything but cynical, but I feel a bit like it's my responsibility with this talk about so much that's ugly by saying, let's imagine doing something better. So thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. If there's any questions, I'd love to chat with you. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to talk about? It won't hurt my feelings if you slip outside to cool down a little bit. Yeah.
Last I heard, a place where Stetson Kennedy used to live, out in wherever,
St. Johns County.
St. Johns County, was supposedly going to turn into some type of historical museum or whatever. Do you know anything about it?
Do you want to say anything?
Hey everybody, I'm Karen, and Stetson was my stepfather. And I invite you all to come out and see his home at Beluthahatchee. It is a twice designated literary landmark for Stetson and also for his friend Woody Guthrie. We operate programs and events there. We partner with the North Florida Folk Network and have Second Sunday at Stetson's every month. We have a wonderful 2-hour house concert and a tour of Stetson's home also. So I would be happy. You can go to our Facebook page and send me a message, Stetson Kennedy Foundation on Facebook, and I'd be happy to schedule a tour. They're available anytime by reservation. The Stetson Kennedy Foundation operates programs and events here, so I'd love to have all of y'all out there. I also want to thank you for mentioning Harry and Harriet Moore. One of Stetson's last words were for all of y'all to never forget what happened to Harry Moore. It's a very powerful story, so thank you very much. A lot of people ask me what Stetson would say today, and wow, he'd have a lot to say. But he would say to all of us, there's still work to do. So I'm inspired by all of y'all coming tonight and seeing all these beautiful faces, and we've still got work to do.
Just a thought, I think a lot about the narrative that we have. And, Stetson Kennedy's, the work that he did, and this beautiful place out of Beluthahatchee. There is also, I'm just going to, call it out, there is this place called the Museum of Southern History outside of Ortega, which is not a museum of Southern history, it's a museum of Confederate history. I've been in there, I've talked to them, I've written about it. I asked them, what do you have about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference? What do you have about the Civil Rights Movement? What do you have about the Blues? What do you have about Frederick Douglass? And the answer was, who's Frederick Douglass? And this was before the president said he had heard some good things about the work Frederick Douglass had been doing lately. So, you know, history it's a narrative, and it's about the present, and there are lots of people who want to control that narrative so that they can interpret it in certain ways for what's going on right now. Wells, Todd, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. There's so much to say.
Yeah.
But I do want to say this. We still have issues in Jacksonville. And one of the biggest issues we have today is the police.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of control. They beat a 17-year-old up this past week or so. They shot a man on a domestic call they were responding to. They shot him 5 times. I asked Sheriff Williams what the protocol was for responding to domestic violence calls, and he didn't answer my question. So what we're doing is we are starting a relentless campaign, a nonstop campaign, to out the police, to explain to the public their policies and procedures. And my thing here is tonight, so many people came out to this. I knew people were coming, I didn't know this was going to happen. I want to invite any of you who want to volunteer on doing something about this issue, because the killing's not going to stop. The violence is not going to stop. The threats are not going to stop. The interrogations in the police cars when they take you into their garages down under the police station, that's not going to stop. So we have to do something. And this is what this last election has shown us. We have to do something.
Together.
Together.
Yeah. Together.
So, my name is Wells Todd. I'm a member of the Jacksonville Progressive Coalition. I've got cards in my pocket. We did help change the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest, but the community got behind that too. And we did help to get Angela Corey out of office. Once again, the community got behind that. Okay? And now, this is a tall mountain to climb, but we can do it. We can do it because lives depend on it. Okay? So I want to thank all you guys for coming out. I can't wait till I break this wall down.
Yes, that's right. And he said he's a member, which he is, of the Jacksonville Progressive Coalition, but he's at least a founder, if not the founder. Right? Mike, do you want to? Is it
Co-founder.
Co-founder? All right. And there's also Leanne and Mike and Canel. Thank you for coming out. All right. Who else has questions or comments? Anybody? I'm sure we'll descend into, maybe ascend into smaller conversations, but yeah.
How is it that you're able to talk about the history of the Klan, because it so often isn't covered, without it devolving into a narrative of the good white people versus the bad white people, and creating this idea that that ignoring racism, unfortunately, among all different kinds of white people, whether they be quote unquote rednecks, or whether they be white liberals, or people in the north, or people in the south.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a difficult question. How, tell me if I mess it up, all right, but how can we talk about the history of the Klan and race relations in the South and in Jacksonville without devolving into bitterness about good white people and bad white people? Is that, did I mess that up?
I guess my answer would be we have to talk about how the Klan declined, right? But then more sophisticated regimes and institutions popped up. You talked about law and order, mandatory minimums, the prison industrial complex. And also just things like, you know, subtle racism, maybe like microaggressions and things that we white people perpetuate on a daily basis, sometimes without realizing it, and not create this idea of, because I know a lot of people growing up, it was like, oh, there was those bad white people, but we're on the good side, we're not like them.
Yeah.
But then you start to like not see it in your own life and not confront it in your own life.
I mean, it's I wish that were simple, but it's complicated. And I think that if people leave here, I'm going to try and answer that. I'm not just trying to obviate it. But I think if people leave here with those questions, then they'll also keep having those discussions, you know? And I think that is part of what is important about talking about now. Because if you have, like, if a guy came in here with a big white hood and his mask, you know, over his, we'd all go, okay, bad guy, right? But it's more subtle now. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it's not. And there is a whole kind of, you know, it's interesting to me that a lot of people who proclaim a kind of revisionism of Confederate history tell everybody else that if, for example, the Confederate flag offends us, then we need to learn history, right? But in fact, they have revised history. I mean, heritage, not hate it's bullshit, you know? And if you go back to the Confederate leaders themselves, they all spoke about slavery. It was later, when civil rights came around, that the Klan, for example, increased its activity and its membership, but also that people started hearkening back to the Confederacy as this, you know...
States' rights.
States' rights, yeah, states' rights. Like it was all just about our independence, and we didn't want the big federal government telling us what we had to do, right?
Yeah, that's how it was explained to me as a kid. That it's exactly the states' rights and
exactly
slavery,
right. And I think if you go to, you know, a friend of mine recently said something about this, and I don't want to point him out, but I think it's really brave. But he said, you know, that he recently sought out a Frederick Douglass narrative, and it was not the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, which is the one I've assigned more than any other literary text in my classroom. But it's the Douglass text that most people read, but it was a later text, My Bondage and My Freedom. And he said, you know, that rid me of the last of that heritage, not hate stuff that I was holding on to. And I think if you think about it, yeah, you don't want to feel like I grew up in the South, my parents loved me. I don't want to believe that my heritage is bound up in slavery and race hatred, right? You know? But, so I think that it takes a lot of courage, and it's hard, and it's painful, and it's shameful, you know? And I speak as someone who's, you know, my father grew up in rural Georgia in the Great Depression, and, you know, my family didn't have slaves, but you know what? They didn't have money for slaves, you know? They were sharecroppers. But there's still some ugly history back there. And I think if you make excuses for it, man, you're making excuses for it, you know? So, but it persists in the form of apologies and in the form of willful ignorance in the guise of talking about like what the true history is, right? And people who say that if we take down the Confederate memorials, we're rewriting history. Who's learned any history from that Confederate memorial in Hemming Park? Who goes, oh, wow, that tells me something. It's not about rewriting history. Park memorials are honorifics. That's about who you honor. If you want to talk about history, take that thing down and stick it in a museum and have something where people can read about it and say, this was placed there at such and such time, this is who it was about, blah, blah, blah. Because nobody goes over to Hemming Park and looks up at that thing and says, oh, wow, I've learned so much about history now, right? I don't know if I answered your question. I think I just ranted.
Speaking to that real quick.
Okay.
Go ahead. Well, just really quick, what she was asking you about, Tim.
Yes.
I think part of it too is because I went back to college at 55 and I just graduated last month, so I've been around a lot of years. Never took a lot of things. So I went to Edward Waters College, as a matter of fact. I'm a mixed-race woman, and so I've been around many, many, many young African American people for years now. And one of the things I think we must be willing to do as we move forward and be progressive people as a group. We need to be willing to have our feelings hurt, to go home and cry, and to be called out on every bit of this junk. Okay?
Right.
Because until we do that, and we admit that it is real and it is systemic in every level of our lives, it's never going to end. And until we turn off the cable news and stop listening to all this hatred and rhetoric and talk to each other and quit letting them divide and conquer us, none of this is ever going to change. Ever.
I want to talk about when you were talking about, like, it's as you were saying, it's like, it's good white people, it's just revisionist history of what is actually the Confederacy stood for. They literally went to war because of slavery.
Right.
There's no wrapping any roses. I mean, it's like, just because you put roses on it, it's still shit. It's bullshit. Excuse my language, that's just a fact. And we also have to recognize the form that white supremacy has took. I would recommend a book for you all to read. It's called New Jim Crow. It's this fact that just because black people are walking around in chains, that we've achieved freedom, that we've achieved some. There's still differences and political differences of historical differences between blacks and whites. So it's institutional. We have institutionalized white supremacy. White supremacy has taken on a different form. You see, the KKK is no longer walking around in hoods. They're wearing suits now.
They're all right now.
Yeah, they're all right. Yeah, they're all right. They're wearing suits now. They fluff up their language. They put out this language that's easy to digest. That makes you think that, it's genocide of white people. All blacks want to kill all white people. It's not about that. It has to be addressed. Institutional, systematic issues against and racism. We have to address that. Whether you say voting is the way to go, or to reclaiming our institutions for the people and by the people. Like Jacksonville, literally, this history is rooted in racism. All you have to do is take a ride around, look at the names of the streets. So all of these things, these things have to be addressed. Everyone, especially in the parts of white people. White people have to challenge themselves and challenge their families. Granted, I met a lot of white people who say, such and such is my friend, they call it white feelings. And that does nothing but enable the continuation of white supremacy, the continuation of oppression by doing nothing, by not addressing it, shutting it down right then and there. So.
And the School to Prison Pipeline starts in grade school, people. I did an internship at a Title I school in kindergarten class, and I've seen it for myself. I can witness that.
Does everybody know Canal? How many people know Canal? Canal Crooms, if you haven't met him before, you may have seen him in a video with a police officer's knee on his neck because he was across the street with the now called Jack's 5. And the Jacksville Progressive Coalition has done wonderful work. I'm actually a little bit surprised that the sheriff has been somewhat forthcoming, although I'm still, cynical about it, and I'm still waiting to see, if I go protest, are people going to come punch me in the face, Alan Marshall says yes. Who else had a hand up? Yeah.
I just want to say briefly, institutions are not going to protect us.
No.
Because we don't belong to those institutions, we didn't create those institutions, we don't support those institutions, so there has to be a radical change in our minds. We have to create a different institutional system. And until we do that, the Klan would be used as a canard, so to speak, to say, oh, those are the clowns, that's the Klan. look, there's white militias armed, ready to recreate the Civil War and come and kill all of us that are not white. So the Klan is a joke. Yeah, the Klan is a joke. They're a very small thing. They're disappearing. It's historical. The ultra-right militias in Georgia, Alabama, and the West, in Oregon, and Montana, that's what you got to worry about. And that's what we need to do as a community is, again, change the institution. Because we don't belong to it. Look around. We're not it. We're victims of. So when are we going to say, let's do it? This is great. We got, what, 90 people? Should be 100,000 people irate in Jacksonville at what happened to the Jacks 5. Yeah. We were at the park and we saw it. We presented it to the media presented it to the authorities. What did they do? They try to sweep it under the rug. They think it's over. Is it over? No. It's the beginning. And they thought we were going to stay silent, right? We were going to go back and say, wow, we're not going to ever go out again. Look at the violence. They put you in the hospital. They put Willie in the hospital. This is when we double up and triple up. And we keep showing up. This is a program of action. If you do it in the internet with all caps, stay home and keep doing it. Because you're not doing anything with it. Show up. Show up when you have a speech. When we're out there, show up and support us. 5 minutes of your time on a Saturday is nothing.
There's power in numbers, right?
Absolutely.
I do want to touch on your talk here, talking about history of the KKK. It's important that as we all understand that the history of the KKK didn't stop at the collapse of the KKK. It took a different shape and transformed. And the FBI actually came out with a report that said that white supremacists have infiltrated the police departments all over the country. And the federal government has actually said, they said, well, we have no oversight over that. There's not very much we can do about that. That's not by accident. That is by design.
Oh, yeah.
That's by design, that the federal government has no oversight, that has no standard set for police departments across the country. And what has happened is that the white supremacists, what they did, they infiltrated the police department. And it's important to understand the history of the police department. The police department actually started as slave patrols.
Yes.
Okay? It started as slave patrols. That is just on the basis, the foundation of the police department is historically racist and historically corrupt. And it's only going to continue that way. So don't pay too much attention to what Sheriff Mike Williams comes out and says, we're going to give these people body cameras. The police beat the crap out of me on camera and nothing happened.
Yeah, right.
Okay? So body cameras aren't the answer. What we need, we the people, we as a community have to take control of the police. This community control of the police, community ownership of the police. Because if we say the city belongs to us, I see no reason why the police don't as well by extension. So that, again, all of this it takes building movements, and it takes trade unions, it takes education. A lot of people here who are older and not capable of doing much, what you can do is teach your generation, teach your children, your grandchildren, and get them involved, put them out in the activism, and get them involved. This is a fight that's going to carry on for generations. It's not over. Just because we got the Civil Rights Act, we didn't win anything. We're still struggling. So.
Maybe a couple more comments, and then we can of course have all the smaller discussions among ourselves that we want to have. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I don't know how much this kind of thing would cost, but I've always thought that if I'm going to videotape something, I want the videotape signal to be going somewhere else, so I'll have another copy of it, so that if the police take my camera, I can go and say, I still have it. You can do that, and they can't, so that way you can always have your tape.
You got Facebook Live.
Pretty enthusiastic response waiting there.
ACLU in several cities has an app, and it is coming to the south, and it's coming to Jacksonville eventually. It's not in Florida yet, where you have an app, and anything you're filming goes straight to them. So it is secured, and they have the ways to disseminate that information.
I think that ACLU has an app for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It has an app, but it's not here yet. It's not in Florida. So we need to push the ACLU to put it in Florida. There's no reason why not.
The ACLU has that.
Not here.
Not in Florida.
It's state by state then?
It is state by state.
Oh,
So we need to put pressure on them to
Okay.
get it here.
There's multiple avenues.
We'll maybe get one more comment, and then of course, again, we can have lots of smaller discussions. Leanne?
Yeah, just following up to the name change to the Nathan Bedford Forest School. Occupy Jax will be starting a campaign coming up to change all of the racially named schools. So along with taking down the monuments as well. Watch out for hashtag #TakeHimDownJax, and tell your friends, spread the word, spread it on social media, because that's going to be a major campaign that's coming up in the next few months.
Good. Awesome.
All right, Matt.
All right, thanks. I actually, to go off what she was saying, I want to reattribute the name of Jacksonville to Helen Hunt Jackson. If you don't know who she is, she wrote "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." She's an indigenous activist, so she did a lot of writing and stuff like that. So we can do that and still not have to change all the Jacksonville stuff, so it saves a ton of money so they can't use that argument. We just take down one specific section and we're good.
Thank you everybody for coming out, and tell the folks at Coniferous back there thank you, and that you want them to also be in the space next door. And I don't know, City, do you guys have like a contact list people should sign on to, or I don't want to give you more work to do? You've done a lot today. Thanks everybody.
Sure, somebody put the beer can right in front of it. I hope it didn't block it.
Thank you for opening.